Really grateful to be that we're being joined today by Professor Debra Moore, someone who I've not actually met, but whose work I've known of for a very, very long time. She's the Jonathan Friedman Distinguished University Professor of History and Judaic Studies at the University of Michigan, one of America's most eminent historians of American Jewry. And I we were in touch because Deborah was emailed me to mention some data that I was not aware of that's really interesting about what American Jews actually believe about Israel and Palestine. And I thought that it would be really worth talking about having her talk a little bit about that data and then how she, as a historian, makes sense of where the conversation among American Jews actually is about Israel today versus previous moments in history. So, Deborah, thank you so much for doing this.
Okay, I'm pleased to be here. So, yes.
Wonderful. So, folks will put questions in the chat, and I may convey some of them to you. But maybe we can just start with some of the data from Portland and maybe elsewhere that you've seen that actually you think kind of reframes perhaps some of the ideas we might have about how American Jews think about Israel.
Okay, so I sent it to you in part because I thought it was really interesting and unexpected. Let me just say that this is data from prior to October 2023. So it was taken not in the context of the crisis that emerged after October 7th, okay? Which I think is also really valuable. Now, Portland Jews are a small community. There are only around 75,000 Jews there, but they are a liberal community. And the data says that 77% of them identify as politically very liberal or liberal. Okay, so it's an interesting snapshot that we're looking at here. One of the items that I think you sent around had to do with their their attitude or self-identity as Zionists, that 52% do not identify as Zionists. So we've got these liberal Jews, 52% of them don't identify as Zionists. On the other hand, half of them have been to Israel. So it's an interesting combination. What I was particularly intrigued about were the questions that they're asking now about attitudes toward Israel, Palestine. And the question that I thought was fascinating was, I consider it important for Israel to be a democratic state. Okay. And of that, 82% strongly agreed with that question, right? They felt it was really important. And then when you go down to the next question, or several, they ask a bunch of other questions, but there's a question there. I consider it important for Israel to be a Jewish state. You only have 38% strongly agreeing. So that's roughly half of the ones who think it's important for it to be democratic versus important to be Jewish. Now, we don't know what they understand Jewish to mean, right? I mean, there's been passed a resolution that Israel is a Jewish state, but it may be in the minds of these American Jews that Jewish refers to the hegemony of the Orthodox, right? The Orthodox establishment in Israel, right?
Right.
Which is one way of interpreting a Jewish state. I think we do understand what they mean by a democratic state, which was to be that, all the citizens of the state, one man, one vote kind of notion, that there should be representations of everyone. So that is what I thought was particularly interesting. Now, half of them feel strongly that Israel should be a refuge for Jews, both now and in the future. Um, and I think that that's, fascinating. A very small number consider that Israel lives up to its values with respect to human rights, only 21%. So it was just a really interesting snapshot from 2022, basically, when the survey was done, 2021, 2022, of a liberal group of American Jews. And it's a snapshot that suggests that there's far more variety among American Jews today than we tend to recognize when we're thinking, making broad generalizations, either based upon what Jewish organizations say or what public intellectuals say.
Interesting. All right, thank you. And I want to again encourage people to put questions in the chat. So I guess one question I have about survey data among about American Jews, who generally does these surveys? And what do you notice? Obviously, a lot of the way you ask questions has a huge impact on kind of what data, what responses you
Right.
get. So who tends to ask these questions, and what would you say are the patterns about kind of who of what kinds of questions tend to be asked and not asked?
Okay. I'll go with one of the not asked
Hmm.
questions because it really bugs me. And that is they tend not to discuss divisions based on gender. They do
Hmm.
discuss divisions based on age, and there's no particular age difference in this surveys. These are surveys that are done by the Cohen Center at Brandeis University, which is one of the major centers for survey research. Matt Boxer and a team of other people, because it's rare that it's any one person who does a survey, did this survey. I know he mentioned that he has a survey coming out now soon on Jews in Maine. Um, so the questions have evolved a bit over the 21st century. They used to not focus as much about different ways of understanding Jewish practice and different ways of understanding politics. And they've become a little more nuanced, I would say. So the survey has 5 categories of people. They have a minimally involved group, a culturally involved group, a spiritual group, a communal group, right? I mean, so they're dividing Jews up in a different way than used to be just based on, do you fast on Yom Kippur and other such practices? Do you belong to a congregation? In this particular case, in Portland, a half of the Jewish adults are members of any kind of congregation. So it's not just a politically liberal group, but it's a largely unaffiliated group, etc. Um, the challenge with asking questions, and I'm not a sociologist, okay? I'm a historian. The challenge with asking questions, however, is that you want to ask questions that bear some relationship to the questions that were asked in the past, so
Hmm.
that you can actually try to see changes across time. If you completely change the questions,
Right.
right? Yeah, then it's like, okay, this is what one snapshot says, but we can't compare it to another snapshot. So each survey serves largely as a snapshot in time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wondered listening to the questions. It seems to me interesting that they say that they ask people, is it important to you that Israel be a democratic state or be a democracy? But they don't ask people, they don't seem to probe that by saying, do you think Israel's a democracy? Or do you think that there's a conflict between Israel being Jewish or a democracy or something more provocative like if Israel, controls Palestinians in the West Bank who don't have the right to vote, do you think it can still be a democracy? It seems like they're not really they're not there are a lot of other questions maybe we could potentially answer that would get at interesting information about how democratic people think the state actually is and how they think about the nature of the state vis-a-vis democracy.